Good morning, everyone. I hope you're well, and I hope this is coming across live and okay for you. I'm Harry Harkus. I'm Managing Director of Finecast UK. Welcome to the findings of our Thinking Inside the Box research project. I believe we have, I think, over 300 people joining us today, so thank you to all of you for taking the time out to join us this morning. We'll be spending the next hour uncovering some insightful findings into the power of TV, so both as a content consumption mechanism and advertising medium. For those of you who joined us earlier in the year, we presented the findings from phase 1 of the research and shared the objectives of the entire project, which, to recap, are as follows. So firstly, understand what is the new normal when it comes to TV. How do viewers define TV? And what does the sector consider to be TV in a world where video is everywhere? Explore changing viewing behavior, the role of broadcaster video on demand, or BVOD, as we know it, and the advertising opportunities emerging from this new world. Third, shine a light on TV as an advertising channel, exploring its role in modern day media mix and to see TV adverts through the eyes of viewers. 4, test engagement between big and small screens and paint a picture of the roles of different screens in the lives of viewers and the environment each presents to advertisers as well. 5, prove addressable advertising is more engaging than non-addressable advertising. And then finally, to gauge levels of openness towards addressable TV advertising amongst viewers. So exploring the opportunities addressable presents the industry, as well as the challenges and barriers to investment. To provide some background, phase 1, if you remember that, sought to answer some of these objectives through polls. We did ethnography sessions, so I think Gogglebox, we did workshops. And the findings showed that viewer perception of TV is absolutely changing, which makes how we define TV much more difficult. Is it just linear? Does it include BVOD and SVOD? And what about online video? As you'll see from the research, it's complicated. The research also showed interesting results as to how viewers perceive TV advertising, demonstrating the level to which it is a trusted medium, and from the quality of the creative and the production needed to remain high. That came across very, very clearly. Today, we're going to look at phase 1 and phase 2 together as one to provide you with a complete picture of both a consumer and industry perspective on TV advertising, particularly the value that addressable advertising can offer, and with a specific focus on 2 aspects of the research. The first, conducted in partnership with UCL's Department of Experimental Psychology, was a scientific study examining the efficacy of addressable TV advertising through viewer engagement. And then secondly, we'll discuss the findings from a series of depth interviews conducted with experts from across the TV advertising industry to understand their thoughts, concerns, and expectations for what is such a powerful medium. Phoebe Casey-Miller from DRG, our research partner, will explain more about the project in its entirety, and she'll be joined by Professor Joseph Devlin from UCL, who will dive into the neuroscience study, which yields some particularly interesting results, highlighting how we behave and respond physiologically to addressable advertising. Following the presentation for Phoebe and Joe, Emily Hanson, and Emily's Finecast marketing director, she'll be hosting a panel discussion with Matt Hill from Thinkbox, Steve Ray from Mindshare, and joined by Kristian Claxton, also from Finecast. There will be an opportunity for questions. We hope, depending on how much time we have, you will see on the sort of top right, on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll be able to open up a window and enter questions into there. We'll get through as many as we can towards the end of the session in the panel. There's also a voting mechanism. So if you want to vote for a particular question, click the like on it, and that should push it up towards the top. Inevitably, we won't answer every question. So those that we don't, just as in the last session we ran earlier in the year, we will send a write-up of the questions and answers round after that. So I hope that all sounds good. Phoebe, I trust you're all set. So over to you.
Thanks, Harry. I hope that everybody's really well today. Thank you so much for joining today to hear the results of the project. It's been over a year in the making, so I'm really excited to finally be able to share them with everyone. Unfortunately, of course, we can't be in person, so I'm just going to have to picture a really big, happy audience, and everyone's going to laugh at all of my jokes. So, in terms of what we're going to discuss today, I'm going to take you through 3 key pillars with Joe's assistance of Thinking Inside the Box. And then I'm going to end on why does this all matter and what could it really mean for the industry in practice. But before I tell you what we found, I'll start with what we actually did. So this was a significant multi-methodology project combining implicit, explicit measures, quant, qual, and scientific techniques to create this real bird's eye view of TV in 2020. We began with quite a significant qual exploratory phase to the project. So we began with viewer workshops across the country where we had viewer discussions and various activities. We then moved on to in-home observation sessions where we're actually part of those viewer moments in the home, being able to understand natural behaviour, how people are actually interacting with TV advertising, and the actual physical impact of the screen within the home. And of course, the biggest challenge for me at that point was trying to keep my camera and tripod up around a lot of overexcited pets. We then moved on to quantify these themes which had emerged through an online survey and a series of nationally representative polls. Just to talk through the sample composition for that online survey, we had a robust nationally representative sample of 1,500 viewers from across the UK. Everybody had a TV screen within their household. They didn't necessarily have to use it, but they had one within their household. And they all watched some form of video or TV at least once a month, which, as you can imagine, was pretty much mainly everyone within the UK. We then started to explore these findings from a different angle, from a new perspective. We spoke to 11 industry experts across media and TV. We ran a series of 1-hour depth interviews. And then perhaps the most exciting part was our neuroscience study in collaboration with UCL. So I'm going to hand over to Professor Joseph Devlin, who's going to talk us through the neuroscience methodology.
Many thanks, Phoebe. Much appreciated. So we got asked to design an experiment to look at audience engagement with addressable versus non-addressable advertising. And once I looked up what addressable advertising was, because I wasn't familiar with the term, we set up a really basically simple experiment where we had 78 people come into the lab. We lost the data from one, so we had a total of 77. But they came to UCL, and what they did was they chose one of 3 different TV programs that they could watch, and embedded in those programs were 16 ads that came from 4 different categories of advertising. These were ads that were targeted towards women, so we call it gender ads, people who were interested in automotive, cars, people who had children the age 13 or younger at home, so these were family targeted ads. And then we had ads for people who were interested in either buying a new mobile handset or changing their mobile service provider in the next 12 months. So those are the 4 categories of addressability. And then there were 4 ads within each. What was really critical was that each participant had 2 of those categories that they were addressable for and 2 that they weren't. So all of the differences were due to the fact that for me, the ad may be addressable, whereas for you, it was not addressable, but they saw the same ad. So any differences that I tell you about as we go on aren't because they saw different ads, it's because of the individual's relationship to the ads that they actually saw. And what we did was we designed this experiment where they watched the program, they saw these ads, and then afterwards, they participated in some psychological tests where we test their liking for the ads, their recall of the ads. But in addition, they were all wearing what amounts to sort of a Fitbit. They were wearing a biometric device that measured their heart rate and what's called the galvanic skin response, which are measures of autonomic nervous system activity. So that is to say, the important thing here is that the more engaging, the more interested you are, you see changes in your autonomic nervous system. And of course, this is something that's not under your conscious control. So it provides a nice implicit measure of audience engagement. And then the final thing I should say is that half of the participants saw these programs and the ads on a large TV screen, and half of them saw them on a handheld small screen. So we could look at differences in terms of engagement, not only in terms of addressability, but also in terms of screen size. And I think with that, Phoebe, I will hand it back. Oh, I should, before I do, I should explain that I'm going to present some ads to you, or ads. I'm going to present some graphs to you that that all take this kind of format that you're seeing on the screen. And I appreciate that it's mildly complicated. I just want to say the 2 important things about it are the horizontal bars that are shown. So for instance, in this plot, you can see in the left that ads that had that were addressable, that were relevant to the audience, are shown in that sort of orange color. And on average, their response was higher. People liked them more than the ads that were not addressable, that were not relevant to them. And the key is just that you can see that in the two vertical lines. The line for the addressable ads is higher than the other. The second piece of information that's really important is the percentage that's shown there. So you can see that there's a percentage that, with a green circle around it, says 100%. This is how confident we are in the result, right? So often you can see little differences. The question is, how meaningful are the differences? And that's what this percentage is telling us. Anything that's 90 to 100% is strong evidence for a significant difference. Anything from 70 to 89%, which is shown off on the right, is a moderate evidence. And anything from 69% and less is basically weak to no evidence. So for instance, in this case, there's strong evidence that addressable ads were liked more than non-addressable ads, but there was no difference that people liked the ads more if they saw them on a big screen or on a small screen. I'll give you the details of as we go along, but I just wanted to present this as the format that I'm likely to show you the results in. Now, I will pass it back to Phoebe. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe. So before we start thinking inside the box, or in the spirit of the TV sector's love of acronyms, TISB, we're going to start by looking outside of the box. So what's going on in the ad industry? There's no point exploring TV and shining a light on TV and the role of TV in a media mix in 2020 without looking outside at what's going on and what's important. I'm going to talk through three key themes which emerge from the discussions with industry experts and also with viewers when it came to the advertising industry. So firstly, there's been so much evolution in the industry. It's a change in playing field for advertisers to navigate, from advancements in tech to the subsequent impact that has on changing consumer behaviour. Now, with this sense of evolution comes this real sense of excitement. It's really exciting times. We're in a new world of advertising. There's this real fusion of traditional tried and tested advertising channels with much more advanced opportunities, new platforms. Now, of course, with all of this comes new opportunities to reach people in different environments, in different contexts. Now, I've actually put this in the middle as, of course, it's an opportunity to reach people in new ways, but it's also a challenge, as it's really important that advertisers can understand what the value of these new opportunities are, how they should actually use them, what is the most effective way for them to get the most from those new opportunities. And of course, with any new advertising opportunity comes the need for new measurement solutions. So a really key challenge within the advertising industry at the moment is the need for cross-media, cross-platform, holistic measurement. And being able to embed these new opportunities into working practices, so working in a new way, teams with new and different skill sets needed to take the most advantage from these different opportunities. Now, consumer trust, so a really big and a really important one. So some of the experts that we spoke to questioned whether consumer trust in advertising was at an all-time low. So in a UK nationally representative poll, we found that half of people didn't trust any key advertising channels, and we can see that that metric actually rises across the generation to, I think, that quite frightening stat of 70% of those 65 and over who don't trust any key advertising channels. Now, it was questioned whether online hyper-targeted advertising is perhaps been damaging for the industry. And when you speak to consumers, some have very negative connotations when it comes to personalised or targeted advertising. And so, for example, one of the viewers that we spoke to told us about how he'd been looking for a suitcase online and he was still being targeted with suitcase ads 3 months after he'd come back from his holiday. And so I think that really creates a picture of that sense of intrusion that people feel around personalised advertising. The language that people use when they're actually talking about personalised or targeted advertising can be very emotive. It almost has this criminal theme, so from creepy, inhuman, stalkerish, intrusive. It almost sounds like the tagline for a new Netflix crime documentary. Now, we found that 52% within our total sample felt that personalised advertising was intrusive. Now, this group on the left-hand side who don't mind personalised advertising, there really is two sides to this. So some people really do accept it as part of modern life. It's just part of the world that we live in, something that we have to accept. especially when it can provide them with a useful insight or a good deal. They recognise that it has benefits to them as a consumer. So, for example, one of the ladies that we spoke to had been looking online for a new top, had gone out to buy that top, and then later on received some online targeted advertising saying actually you can get that 30% off now. So was able to use that to her own benefit and gain an insight. Now, if we just look at that 52% who told us that they found personalised advertising to be intrusive, this is when it gets really interesting. So there's this very clear distinction between personalised and targeted and something that's relevant to a consumer. So 22% of that group who felt that personalised advertising was intrusive told us that they would be more likely to watch TV ads if they were relevant to them. So really what that tells us is when it comes to personalised, targeted, addressable advertising, execution is really, really key, how it makes the consumer feel. And there's a very clear line between something that's relevant and something that's creepy and intrusive. Creative is crucial. The experts that we spoke to questioned whether perhaps there's been a focus on delivery mechanisms and measurement rather than creativity and innovation. If we look back to our younger years, do the creators of today stand up to this? So Cadbury's Gorilla, great example. Are there creators out there today that are making people feel like how I feel about Cadbury's Gorilla advert? Now, of course, there's a lot of opportunities when it comes to creative in the modern world. So there's the opportunity to create this sense of creative relevance. There's the opportunity to create strong emotional connections. And that's something that we've really seen coming out during COVID on TV. So brands using emotional, authentic messaging to create real, strong connections with consumers. And I think really stepping out of the role of just offering a product or a service, but being actually a pivot of support for people within their lives. And alongside that, the opportunity to be bold, eye-catching, brave, technologically innovative to take advantage of this new world of advertising that we live in. And then tailoring creators to the channel environment. So having that knowledge and that understanding that the way that people feel about advertising online and online video compared to TV, as an example, is very different. The way that they use those platforms is very different. Their mindset is different within that moment. So people on YouTube are very primed to click skip. They say, you know, we just hover our mouse over it. We're waiting to be able to press skip. And so understanding the nuances in how consumers are using these different platforms is really, really important to be able to engage with them. So we've talked about the wider advertising industry and what's going on. How does TV fit into this? What are the specific changes that are happening in terms of your behaviour and the TV sector that are creating these new opportunities and challenges for advertisers? So once we've spoken about that, we're going to deep dive into addressable TV. So really why we're here, the challenges and opportunities that it presents and what the barriers to investment are for advertisers. So firstly, let's think about TV. So what's changing and why do we care? Firstly, the actual experience of watching TV is different. So if we take our 1,500 respondents all lined up waiting for me to ask them a question, we found that 57% told us that the way that they watch TV has actually changed over the past 5 years. Now that group on the left-hand side who disagreed with this, it was very skewed towards over 55s. So why is the experience of viewing TV different? Perhaps the most important thing is that viewers have complete control over what they watch, how they watch, where they watch. The ball is completely in their court and they also completely know that. And just to flip back to what I said earlier about personalised advertising and how people feel about it, this sense of control that people have over their media consumption is very, very opposite to that. So if people associate personalised advertising with that lack of control and loss of control, that's very different to how they feel around their general media consumption. Flexibility and variety when it comes to TV, which perhaps looking back decades ago weren't something that were really key within TV, are incredibly important and a really key viewer expectation. So we asked people, if you could only choose one type of TV or video forever, what would you choose? But then, most importantly, we asked them why. And the top reasons for those decisions were around flexibility and variety. It's something that people expect and something they know that they can get. TV is absolutely everywhere. It's no longer just confined to living rooms. It's on the tablet or laptop in bed before going to sleep. It's while people are cooking, cleaning. It's even expanded out of the home. People are viewing in their cars, Of course, not while they're driving, while they're waiting in their cars, in waiting rooms, while they're commuting. So we can see all of these new advertising opportunities, these new viewing moments that are becoming so prevalent in the world around us. What people actually think of as TV is changing. Now, to highlight this, if we focus on this 10% of people within our sample who told us that they very, very infrequently watch linear TV or even never watched it, and we asked those people, how long in an average day do you watch TV? And 3 in 4 of them still told us that they were watching more than an hour of TV a day. So if you're not watching traditional or normal TV, which is what viewers would call linear TV, what is it that you're doing? Now, I think for me, this was probably the most interesting stat that came out of the project and probably the one that surprised me most. So only 53% of viewers that we spoke to felt that SVOD was TV. I think that that's really fueled by people seeing it as streaming. They're seeing it as online, and that's very disparate for some people compared to that kind of physical notion of a TV screen within their living rooms that they might have grown up with. However, when it came to BVOD, that percentage rose to 74%, and I think that's because people associate the British broadcasters very, very strongly with TV. However, although the viewer perception of TV is very blurred, it's very unclear, there's not a definitive answer around what TV is, the industry viewpoint is much more clear-cut. So industry professionals that we spoke to agreed that TV was professionally produced content made for the big screen. TV is still a really important part of people's lives. That appetite for TV content is really high and perhaps higher than ever before. So we asked people how often they watch linear TV, and we can see 85% of people who watch linear TV at least once a week. So really high proportion still turn into linear TV, so a really important part of people's lives. And I think it's important to note that some of the experts mentioned the idea of hyperbole around changing viewer behaviour, and it's really important that we understand what those changes actually are, and that linear is still a really important part of people's viewing portfolios. However, people are also watching in all of these other different ways as well. So viewing isn't confined to just one platform or one service. You can go to all of these different places to meet different needs in different viewing moments or opportunities. So clearly there are a lot of changes, but really viewing becoming so much more expansive. The actual TV in the home is still very important. So people liken the TV to a fire in olden times. It's a focal point within the room. Some people even said that they would be embarrassed if they didn't have a TV screen at home. Now, however, not everybody is doing the same thing when it comes to TV. So if we look at the total sample, look at their weekly viewing figures, and then we overlay 16 to 34-year-old viewing figures on top of this, we can see that it is very, very disparate. So we can see that when it comes to SVOD and YouTube, 16 to 34-year-olds turn in there much more than the average person. However, again, really important to note that although we can see this fragmentation and 16 to 34-year-olds go into all of these different places, a really fair percentage of them still turn into linear TV to some extent. So what does all of this mean for TV advertising? So that acceptance of having to sit through ads, it being a fundamental part of the TV experience, is changing. Viewers have that control. There's ad-free platforms if they don't want to watch ads. Some viewers told us that they felt bombarded by TV ads, they found them irritating. So it's really, really important that we understand that viewers do have this total sense of control and they are able to just walk away from TV ads completely if they want to. In general, this all means that capturing attention is much harder. In general, people are consuming so much media, there's advertising everywhere. So really cutting through, and this is where, again, creative becomes so important. And as we've seen, that real fragmentation amongst younger audiences means that it's a key challenge being able to reach them cost effectively on linear TV. Now we're going to hear from some of our industry experts about TV advertising and addressable TV.
We are moving into a more addressable world.
The opportunity for storytelling, the opportunity to reach mass audiences, and really, above all, the opportunity television has to create a buzz.
I think it's only really thought of as positively, as progression, as new opportunity.
I see a future. I'd like to think it's a near future rather than a distant future where all of TV is bought addressably.
The cliche when I speak to friends outside the industry, when you mention addressable advertising, is they go, "Oh God, yeah, it's that ad that's been chasing me around the internet for the last 4 weeks, trying to get me to buy something I bought for my mum 4 weeks ago."
Where linear TV can reach, 60-70% of the nation for most audiences over a 4-week period, you can't get that scale at the moment for addressable.
Addressable has ended up as being an important part of the arsenal that advertisers have, but it's not supplanted other forms of TV advertising. There still is a need for regular, mass-targeted TV advertising.
So what were some of the core challenges that the industry experts told us when it comes to addressable TV? It's an immature market, it's just at the beginning, it's got a long way to go. It's perceived to be expensive to buy and perhaps expensive to use it really effectively, so being able to tailor creatives to different audience groups. There's a lack of measurement and transparency around what you actually get for your money. How do we prove that addressable TV has worked? So if a brand is using it to reach light TV viewers or a previously unreached audience group, how do we actually prove that it's done that? For big advertisers, is there ever wastage, and how can addressable TV work for different campaign objectives? How can it work for big brands? And I think a really key question that is probably clear from today that I think everybody should have on their minds is how targeted and narrow should that audience be? And perhaps the really core challenge is this lack of education and understanding. So at the beginning, Joe said that he had to go and look up what addressable TV actually was. And, I don't think that that's an uncommon thing at all. There is this real sense of people wanting to understand exactly what it is, how it works, and what they actually get for it. Now, what about the opportunities? So addressable TV can be used to extend the reach of linear TV. It can be used to tell a longer, more controlled story over time, and perhaps even in the future mean that viewers have to sit through less TV ads. It provides a real opportunity for creative relevance. It allows brands to plan campaigns around more specific audience groups, so moving away from perhaps just demographics to behavioural data or the point at which a consumer is along the purchase journey. It holds strong opportunities for certain marketing objectives, so particularly short-term activation or reaching a specific group of consumers with a really specific message. And it really flings open the door to TV advertising for brands of all sizes with geolocation targeting.
First thing the industry has to get clear is how do we measure addressable advertising to show that it worked?
So I think addressable TV is really important, but we need to kind of make the linear side of that 100% addressable.
The internet has a habit of souring people's view of things when it comes to advertising.
New skill sets are needed in the TV team to understand data and to understand addressable and the changing way the TV markets work.
I think addressable opens up the opportunity for smaller advertisers who may not be able to afford to be on television. It opens up the opportunity for major campaigns to be frequency capped, and it opens up that opportunity for personalisation.
I think addressable TV is the thing that will revolutionise the world of TV.
So we've talked about addressable TV from an industry perspective through the eyes of people who actually work within the industry. But what impact does addressable TV actually have on viewer engagement? So I'm going to pass over to Joe, who's going to take us through the results from the neuroscience experiment.
Okay, many thanks, Phoebe. Much appreciated. So I'm just going to take you through the findings that we had. And one of the first things that we did was, after people had watched the programs and seen the ads, one of the things that we did at the end was ask them how much they liked the individual ads that they saw. And you've already essentially seen this bit from my preview, but what we found was that ads that were more relevant to the individual were ads that they liked more than the other ads. So they had basically this kind of 20-point scale from -10 to I hate it to 10, it's the best thing I've ever seen. And you can see that for the addressable ads, they rated them positive, and it was more positive than for the ads that weren't relevant to them, which were basically neutral. And that was, again, a very strong result, very confident in it. One of the other things we did was we gave them a surprise memory test afterwards. So we showed them pictures from the ads, and we said, look, is this something that you saw in an ad, or is it not something that you saw during the half-hour program? And the seen and non-seen ads were actually very carefully mixed, so that it was a hard task. And what we found was that when the ads were relevant, when they were addressable, people remembered the ads better than the ones that weren't relevant to them, the non-addressable ads. It's not a huge effect here, but it's a very, very strong effect. And it's very clear that people did remember the things that were relevant to them better than the things that weren't relevant to them. In addition to that, which is a very explicit measure of people's memory, we also used an implicit measure, which is we measured how quickly they responded to those tasks. So you can tell me, yes, I remember this, or no, I don't remember this, and you're consciously aware of that, but you are generally less aware of how quickly you respond. And this is a neat little measure, because normally what happens is it trades off. People are more accurate if they respond slowly and less accurate if they respond quickly. And I'm sure that fits your own experience. If you rush, you do things less accurately. What we found was that people were actually faster to respond to the addressable ads than the non-addressable ads. So they're not only explicitly more consciously remembering them better, but they actually respond more quickly to them as well, which is a measure of their confidence. So there's a really nice convergence here between the explicit measure and the implicit measure, showing a real strong advantage for the ads that were relevant to the individual. The other thing that we did, which was unusual in the sense that people probably aren't aware that you can do this, but the way the experiment was designed was they always had to answer this, yes, I remember it, no, I don't, by starting their mouse at the same point in the screen and then moving to either yes or moving to no on the screen. And we tracked their mouse movements. And one of the things that's interesting about this is the more confident you are with these things, the faster, more direct you move to the answer. Whereas the less confident that you are, the more indirect the path is. So we can measure those actual mouse trajectories as a measure of implicit confidence. And what we found was that, we move on to the next slide, please, that paths were shorter and more direct when the ads were addressable. That is to say that people moved more confidently to the yes or no answer when it was relevant, when it was an ad that was relevant to them, than when it was an ad that was not relevant to them. So again, this is another implicit measure that suggests that the memory for relevant ads was significantly better than for ads that were not as relevant to the individual. And then to just get into some of the physiology, because I mentioned that people were wearing these biometric devices, one of the things that we do is we measure people's heart rates. And heart rate varies across individuals quite a lot, depending on your fitness levels and what you've been doing recently. So we sort of have to normalize that. But once you take that into account, you can sort of measure whether people's heart rates went up or down with respect to the different ads. And what you found is that the heart rates were lower for addressable, relevant ads than they were for non-addressable ads. And what's really interesting about this is that multiple studies have demonstrated that people's heart rates tend to drop when their interest or focus externally increases. Sometimes people talk about this as kind of a heart-stopping moment, right? But this is the same phenomenon where the more you're focused on things that are external to you, such as these ads, the lower your heart rate goes. And in fact, that's what we saw here. Again, this is a nice implicit measure of engagement or focus on the ads. And then the last one that I want to take you through, and I just have to explain this briefly, is we can not only measure just the basic heart rates, but we can measure how synchronized those heart rates are across individuals. And what we find is that the more engaged you are with something, the more likely your heart rate starts to synchronize with other people who are also doing, the same thing at the same time. So in this case, I'm just illustrating that with the graphics on the left. You can see that there are two people and their heart rates are sort of going up and down at the same time. That would be evidence of synchrony. Their hearts are beating in sync with one another. Whereas on the right, you can see there are two people whose hearts are doing totally different things. There's, going up and down. And that's more characteristic of two people literally not paying attention to the same thing or not being as engaged, right? So this synchrony in terms of the heart rates, the physiology, is actually indicative of greater engagement in the ads. And what we found was that, again, there was greater synchrony, physiological synchrony, when people were watching ads they were interested in than ads that they weren't interested in, that weren't as relevant to them. So this is a really, again, strong and implicit measure that suggests that literally when I start focusing on something that's relevant to me, that's a little bit more interesting, I'm much more likely to synchronize my heart rate with you're also finding this interesting at the same time. If it's something that neither of us are interested in, we're much less likely to be in sync. So this is an implicit measure of engagement that suggests that there is greater engagement for ads that are relevant to people than for the ads that were not relevant to people. And I think I'm handing it back to Phoebe at this point.
Thanks, Joe. So now let's move on to talking about devices. So how do different devices come into all of this? And I must say, I do think that that section name is the best thing that I've done throughout this whole project. Now, there's a lot of cross usage between how people are using the big screen and the small screen. So TV isn't just on the TV screen, and the TV screen isn't just for watching TV. So people are watching online video on the TV, and people are watching TV on much smaller screens. So we can see here 27% of people who are watching YouTube at least monthly are doing so on the big screen. And although some people talked about how that experience could be quite clunky and difficult, we can see that people are still making the effort to actually do it. But there seems to be some debate around what is acceptable when it comes to using the TV screen for online video. So in the viewer workshops that we did, one person said, well, it wouldn't be acceptable for me to sit here and watch Mrs. Hinch on my TV screen, would it, on YouTube? And somebody else said, well, actually, why not? So there's this real clear, I guess, lack of acceptance in this evolution of how we're using these different screens for different purposes. Now I'm going to pass back to Joe, who's going to take us through the screen size results from our experiment.
Thanks, Phoebe. Okay, well, the screen size results were slightly less clear than the addressability results, but let me just take you through them. So one of the things that we found was when we tested people's memory, that people remembered the ads that they saw on larger screens, TV size screens, better than the ads that they saw on handheld size screens. And again, it's a strong effect. You can see it there on the left. And that was in terms of their explicit recall for the content of the ads. Now, the two in the middle and on the right actually have a little bit more, less information in them, in the sense that people didn't like the ads differently, right? There was no evidence that they liked the ads more or less if they saw it on a big screen. And similarly, when we measure their sort of mouse trajectories in their memory task, which I mentioned before is an implicit measure of memory, there was no difference between them. So it didn't make a difference whether they had seen the ad on a large or a small screen. The mouse trajectories were essentially the same between them. So there's an advantage here for remembering them explicitly, but not in the other two measures. What we did find was that there were physiological differences in their response to these ads, which is to say the heart rates were much lower when they were watching them on a big screen than on a small screen, which is consistent with this idea of much greater focus when they were seeing it on a large screen. And in fact, there's a lot of good psychology and physiology in the past that suggests that this is exactly what you find. Larger screens lead to better memory, lead to better focus. But what was interesting and unexpected was that there was a greater advantage in terms of the heart rate synchrony for small screens over large screens. And in fact, as I say, this is unexpected. I don't really have an answer for why this might be, but the data are, again, very clear, and that's what the data show. I think I'll give it back to Phoebe.
Okay, so I'd like to end on what does this all mean in practice? So what can you take away from this project? And of course, this has been a whistle-stop tour of a really extensive piece of work. I could probably sit here for the next 8 hours and tell you interesting things that we found, but these are kind of the core things that we've worked with Finecast in terms of what does this mean in practice. Now, firstly, TV is a unique advertising opportunity now, particularly when it comes to trust. So analysing and understanding how TV of today can best work for different brands is really important. How can brands use their own data to better inform TV execution? How can brands create innovative campaigns using the full arsenal of opportunities that the evolving TV ecosystem has to offer? What people consider TV to be is rapidly evolving. TV does not mean the same thing to everyone anymore. How are particular consumer groups interacting with different parts of TV, and how can they in turn best be reached? And finally, creative is so important, especially when it's harder than ever to grab attention and take advantage of all of the advertising occasions and environments presented by TV in the modern world. Viewers want something relevant, they want something engaging, something that stands out. But of course, getting that targeting right when it comes to addressable is really, really key. So knowing your consumer or potential consumer, who are they and what do they want to see? And keeping brands on the right side of creepy and intrusive is of course a very, very real challenge. So I'm now going to hand over to Emily Hanson, Marketing Director at Finecast, who is going to moderate our panel discussion.
Hi everyone, and a big thank you first to Phoebe and Joe for walking us through those findings. There's an awful lot to take in there. As she mentioned, it was quite an extensive piece of research. But I now have the pleasure of delving into some of these key themes that have been talked about already a little bit deeper. And to do so, I am going to be joined by an industry panel. Okay, well, we should be able to see people's faces shortly, but in the absence of being able to do that, you can hear their lovely voices. So first of all, I want to introduce Matt Hill, who is the Director of Research and Planning at Thinkbox. I've also joined today by Steve Ray, Joint Head of Planning at Mindshare. And last but not least, I also am joined by Kristian Claxton, who is our Head of Client Engagement at Finecast. Thank you to the three of you for joining today.
Morning, Emily.
Morning.
So let's get right to it in the interest of time. So first off, I think, and we had a question in the Q&A about this as well today, there is a fine line between targeting and relevance. And that was one of the key things that came out in the research. You know, 1 in 3 stated that they would be more likely to view TV ads if they're relevant to them. And Joe took us through the neuroscience findings, and some of those experiments showed that people liked and remembered addressable ads better. So I guess my question, and I'm going to go to you, Steve, first, is, you know, what opportunities does this open up for advertisers, and where do we kind of draw that line between targeted, personalised and relevant?
Cool, thanks Emily, and thank you for having me. Hi everyone. I think Phoebe touched on this actually to start off with when she was giving some examples around that difference between targeting, relevance and personalisation, and it's a fine line that we as planners, as advertisers tread when it comes to the difference between the two. Especially when we start to focus on digital signals that are trying to define the right moments, the right mindsets that allow us to connect with people. And again, we heard from that, if you get it wrong, it kind of gets a little bit disturbing. So that idea of being hunted around the internet, feeling like you've seen something, you're being targeted by an ad for something you literally looked at a couple of minutes before, or even how did they know that about me? I think we should, in that mind, we should always strive to be relevant. Relevance is hugely important, but we should tailor and be careful around how targeted we want to be for any piece of communication. So the intent behind that piece of comms is really important. I think the fact that people respond better though to addressable ads is something that we should be really excited about as an industry, because it demonstrates that value of impact over reach. So we heard about it today. I was on a talk earlier today about something similar, where we've seen recent research from the likes of Walk, a wider conversation in the industry, that we shift our focus from planning into planning for attention, away from reach. So I think we shouldn't be satisfied that we offer up an opportunity to see. We should always be making sure that our comms are having an impact, and the opportunity with addressable kind of leans into that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Do you want to add to that, Kristian?
Yeah, I think there's a balance to be struck between art and science. I think, relevance has a role to play when you're looking at sort of the pointy end of the funnel or sort of sales activation. Targeting specific segments of a specific product offer can be supercharged by relevance. So, for example, if a supermarket that is 20 minutes drive time away from me targets me with Aptamil and it's a bog off, and that's relevant, and actually it might drive an action for me to go and purchase that offer, which is a sort of classic addressable TV use case. But I guess contrary to that, if I think about some of the most impactful ads from my experience when I was much younger, I'm probably giving my age away a little bit, but I think of the Mercedes-Benz ad where Alanis Morissette did the cover of Janis Joplin's Mercedes, and that was at a time before I could even legally drive, but it's something that built a long-term memory structure, and it's still very much remember it today. So that wasn't necessarily relevant, but it did have an emotional impact on me, and long term may have led to a purchase of a car.
Yeah, and then Matt, I guess that you can follow on from that.
Yeah, well, I think it's pretty much been covered. I think the end result is that it's a spectrum, isn't it? There's it's not a one size fits all job. We can't just try and limit our advertising to only be to relevant to specific audiences. So I think there's as Kristian said, it's probably most relevant to use relevant advertising at the activation end of the spectrum. So if you can tell when people are in market for something, you probably want to upweight the amount of investment that you're putting against that kind of activity. If it's a brand type of activity, you probably want to step back a bit, and you want to try and make your ad as relevant to the broadest group possible. And to do that, really, it's about brilliant creativity and brilliant sort of contextual planning. So it's not a one size fits all, but it's addressable advertising is opening up new opportunities for advertisers to use the power of TV, this incredible environment, high quality AV, ads being seen all the way through for this type of advertising, which in the past has been trickier to do with TV.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Another theme that we kind of came up quite a bit in the research as well was on trust. So I don't know, I feel like sometimes we maybe take for granted the trusted medium of TV. 5 times as many respondents chose TV as their most trusted channel compared to the next most trusted, and they understand that it's a regulated environment, and as Matt just said, it's much more accessible now to advertisers than ever before. So I guess my question is, and I'll take this to you, Matt, first as well, what are the implications for the future of TV?
I think this is huge, and it's an undervalued aspect of TV. So we've just recently finished a piece of research where we were looking to explore the sort of the implicit signaling power of TV, and the fact it's kind of better to understand that as seen on TV effect. The fact that just by advertising on TV, you're saying something about your brand structure, the quality of your product. And there was an experiment that was conducted by Stanford University many years ago, so 20 odd years ago, where they were looking to understand this kind of the signaling power of different media channels. And they ran an experiment with, I think it was just with a group of their students, where they were given a product description, I think it was a pair of trainers, and they were told that this new pair of trainers was going to be launching, and they were going to be spending £1 million on their advertising campaign. And then they ran a number of cells where they kept everything the same apart from the amount that they were spending on advertising. So £1 million, £5 million, £10 million. And what they found was when there was higher volumes of spend, the actual quality of that trainer was perceived to be much, much higher. And the company that was investing in it was actually it was seen to be much better. So we wanted to look at this type of effect, which is known as cost of signaling, and seeing if we could have a look and see if there's a difference between different channels and their ability to deliver these different signals. So we kind of nicked this experimental design and did exactly the same thing, but instead of looking at the volume of investment, all we did was change the actual channel that was being used. So this product was being launched on a TV campaign over the next 3 months, or it was being launched via a social media campaign over the next 3 months. And what we found was, in a similar way to this, when the budget levels were being changed, where TV was the medium, the perception statements in terms of the quality, the financial strength of the product, the popularity of that brand were much, much higher. And trust is a part of this type of communication. It's just the fact purely by advertising on TV, the takeout of your message is going to be that much stronger, because it comes with these implicit signals of quality. So I think it's something that we kind of ignore, we don't really think about. We think very much just down I guess the rational route in terms of looking for efficiencies in our advertising. Whereas in fact, one of the opposite things is what we need to do. We need to look at how we can actually just signal quality and signal reputation. And using TV is a really smart way of doing that.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's very interesting insight. Kristian, over to you.
Yeah, so I think we all knew that, as sold on TV counted for something. I guess we just didn't know to what extent. And I think what Matt's been doing with Thinkbox has now given us something tangible to take the assumptions into real evidence-based planning. As advocates of TV, we have a duty to continue to advocate this point far and wide, and I think especially to new advertisers, so advertisers who have typically built a brand or have had their first phase of growth in digital platforms, who are now looking for that next phase of growth into TV. If you look at some of the big platforms out there, over 50% of their revenue are from small, medium-sized enterprises. And I think that's really the big opportunity for TV to capitalise on. Those aren't small numbers, and I'm not suggesting that we go after the whole 50%, but there's a big opportunity there where I think we can really advocate the power of TV and the element of trust that drives these businesses. And you only need to look as far as the latest unicorn in the UK, I think, is Gymshark, or I can't remember, I've actually totally blanked, but latest £1 billion business that has not used TV at all, and all the digital messiahs came out onto LinkedIn and said, this demonstrates that you don't need TV to generate a big business and a big brand. The reality is that's the wrong question. It's what could have TV brought to this if you'd used it? Could it have got to that £1 billion mark quicker? Could it be even bigger as a result of TV? So that's why I think the big opportunity is for TV over these next few years.
Thanks, Kristian. And Steve, do you want to add to anything raised there?
Yeah, I think, Kristian, that's a really interesting point around the role of TV in brand growth. We tend to we can look at TV as a way of trying to leverage the trust that we've seen demonstrated exists within TV as a platform, to borrow some of that emotional connection and transfer that to the brand that's advertising. And that might be credibility, that might just be broad trust. It could be to accelerate growth of a challenger brand. It could equally be that because you're a market leader, people kind of expect to see you on TV. And I think that's because people migrate towards TV for trust. We had 2 announcements from Boris around lockdown, and the latest one, which was like not quite lockdown, and both of those were watched by 27 million people. The second one, despite the fact that earlier in the day he'd stood up in front of Parliament and said everything he was going to say at 8 p.m. And it was all over the web. It was on social if you wanted to find it, but people still tuned in because that's you want to hear it in person, and that's the platform where everyone goes to feel like, okay, this is right. It's not fake news. I can trust what I'm seeing. I'd be interested, I suppose, to see how that trust then migrates into BVOD, for example, and into broader online video than big screen, corner of the room, linear TV, broadcast, 9 o'clock news, or what have you. Because I think the platform of delivery might have a bit of an impact on that. But broadly, yeah, trust is hugely important for brands to leverage.
Thanks for that. All 3 of you, I think there's some really key points raised there. We're running rapidly out of time, but I did have one more question. If we can kind of look at this quickly on screen size, because that was another area that we looked at, and the difference between kind of the need states of viewing on small and large screens. But you know, when viewers were given the choice, it was kind of an overwhelming majority to kind of watch content on the big screen. So I guess I'd like to get your views on this. Did you want to go first, Kristian?
Yeah, sure. So I think, I think we all assumed to know that all screens aren't created equal. And it's good to start to put some evidence behind that. And I think this is a really good start, just from an ad call and a memorability point of view, that demonstrates TV stands head and shoulders above small screens when looking at these things. But that doesn't really stop there. I think we need to consider the fact that TV is a shared viewing experience. So for every impact you get in on average 1.7 people watching that. It's also still the largest real estate in terms of viewing. Upholding, north of 70% of all viewing is still through video viewing is through TV. You mentioned the viewing state and experience. We know that TV is more relaxed, more susceptible to advertising, dare I say it. And then there's a multitude of knock-on effects in terms of attention, in terms of sales, in terms of business effect. There's a load of research to supporting this point. So I think it's really the implications are for planning, thinking about how and when to use different screens for different objectives, which isn't telling anyone anything new. But I think the big thing for me, and I was just mentioning this to Harry now, was, there's still a void in terms of creativity in this space. I don't think we're utilising and getting the maximum yield from creative. The 30-second TV creative does work fairly well on smaller screens, but I think there's ways in which we can supercharge and make creative work harder, depending on what our objectives are, and then we can actually start to think how to better utilize and plan different screens as well.
Yeah, completely agree. And Steve, I think we'd love to get your planning perspective on this.
Yeah, I think I completely agree, Kristian. The research that we saw up front again talked about creative as well, which you just touched on. I think really the only thing that I would add around that is that we talk a lot about planning for social channels, for Facebook, for example, and making sure that what we produce is fit for feed. And we don't necessarily spend as much time thinking about doing that for all of the other video platforms that we're distributing, right through to how people are experiencing it on TV. And we've seen that growth during pandemic, in that first lockdown, of people migrating even more to connected TV to watch BVOD, for example. And that, understanding that shift and the fact that you have that larger canvas. I'm looking over at the corner of my room again, because that's exactly where the TV is. That big screen for getting your message across is really powerful. And we started off by talking about the digital signals for relevance and targeting being hugely important, but the mindset that people are in, and when we approach that, is equally of value to understand, so that we can tailor everything accordingly.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Matt, did you have anything to add? Any closing thoughts on that?
Just very quickly, I think and this potentially sort of ties back into the relevance point, is the shared aspect of TV. And think of all those big purchase decisions that you make. You don't make them on your own. And we see people talk about the telly they're watching. They also talk about the ads they see. And we've seen it when we've just been filming people watch TV. They see an ad and they talk about it. Just so being able to create sort of direct conversation, something that's actually relevant to people, whether they're planning a holiday or buying a car, that's a really incredible, powerful aspect of the big TV screen that you can't get via a device. And I think we need to sort of start factoring that into some of these planning decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Thank you very much for those thoughts. We are out of time, but I did promise that I would maybe have a quick look at some of the Q&A, so maybe we can answer a couple of questions. I think some of the ones in here might also be for our speakers, so I might ask Phoebe and Joe to turn their cameras on and join us. But so the first question here is, what proof do you have that the cost of premium addressable ads is more effective in terms of driving sales for a brand versus broader targeting? So Phoebe, is that something that you can answer in terms of the proof that came from the research?
Yeah, so we focused this part of the research on those viewer engagement metrics, so to understand the difference in that viewing experience and to set the scene of what's going on in the industry by talking to experts. So the third phase of this project, coming early next year, is really to explore the actual impact on brands. So I think that's where that question will really be able to be answered really clearly.
Yeah, we have more coming in early in the new year on that, so we'll keep you posted. The next one is for Joe, I think. So which audiences are addressable ads better for according to the neuroscience experiment? So did you see a pattern for the sectors that it works better for?
In the data that we had, one of the things that I was really surprised about is it worked most strongly for the automobiles. So the interesting thing is, of course, car ads all look kind of similar to one another, right? They have a particular style. And the fact that people were able to remember, no, I saw this Ford ad and not this Jaguar ad, despite the fact that, my goodness, they look similar other than the color of the car. You can tell I'm not a car guy. But nonetheless, it was really strong effect there. And it was also strong for the gender ads, so that ads that were targeted at women, they had a stronger effect. The mobile ads were slightly less strong. And then the family category was the category that showed the least effect in terms of addressability. On the other hand, it was also the least clear category in the sense that the ads were very different from one another. Whereas the 4 car ads are pretty clearly related to one another, whereas there are lots of different things that you can target with respect to families. And in this case, we had like some holiday ads, we had some like home products and video games and things. So I don't think that people saw the category as clearly, and that may be related to this effect.
Thank you very much for adding that. And I think that's all we've got time for. I see we've got a number of other published questions here, so we'll be sure, as Harry mentioned at the beginning, to get back to you on those. We'll be publishing a post on our website, so more details will be shared of that. So thank you to all of you for joining us. Thank you to all of our speakers and panelists, and have a good rest of the day.